I'm still in the Read What You Own challenge. Hello, welcome to my channel, Another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg. This is the first week in February, and I'm going to be updating my reading of the last half of January. It has been a few weeks since I've done an update on what I have read. I had initially intended to review every book that I read this year, 2026, but that proved to be a little too ambitious. So I'm going back to the wrap-up format to give you just a very brief description of every book that I read. I'm also in the Read What You Own challenge. This is a challenge created by that evil mastermind, Criminali, to read 100 books that you already own before buying another book. I am doing a variation of that challenge where I'm going to be reading 25,000 pages of books that I own before buying another book. I will be giving every book that I finish reading a unique rating. I have created my own rating system. It ranges from bloody hell yes down to bloody hell no. It's rather blasphemous, a little bit humorous, but I think that it fits me. Okay, so what books have I been reading since I last gave an update? I listened to the audiobook version of I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. It is about 320 pages in the print edition. This is like the third time I have read this book. I know I read it in high school or early college, and then I read it sometime in my 40s, but I revisited this short horror novel, and wow, what a great horror novel this one is. It did make it onto my 20 essentials of horror books that everyone should read. It is essentially a retelling of the vampire legend in a post-apocalyptic America. Everyone has turned into vampires except for one man. Richard Matheson gives a very scientific explanation of why vampires are vampires and gets away from that supernatural element that you would normally find in Bram Stoker's Dracula or Stephen King's Salem's Lot or the books of Anne Rice. And I find that a very refreshing look at vampires. This is a horror novel that everyone should read, and my rating is, of course, bloody hell yes. In December, I did a video that asked me what was my favorite banned book. And I had lots of banned books to choose from, but I decided to go with Mouse. This is a graphic memoir of the author Art Spiegelman talking to his father, who was a survivor of Auschwitz. And there are a number of reasons why this book was banned. On the surface, people say there's pictures of mouse nudity, but the mouse nudity is not the reasons this book was banned. This book was banned because there are many white supremacists and anti-Semites who do not want their children to learn what happened in World War II to the Jews in Germany. They want to whitewash that, send it under the cover, because maybe the children would find sympathy with the Jews. And if you're an anti-Semite, if you are a white supremacist, you don't want your children having sympathy with one of those other races. And this is just a fabulous way to tell a story. This is a book that brought graphic novels into the literature of modern America and the modern world, because Art Spiegelman's storytelling is just fantastic. There are two storylines in essence. One is Art Spiegelman discussing with his father what he learned, and then you go back into Spiegelman's history that starts off with Poland before World War II started. And I will have to say that Art Spiegelman's father is a hard man to like, but you understand his angst at the world and why he is that way. And this comes in 2 volumes. I guess it counts as 2 books. There's one little scene in this book that I kind of want to highlight. This is sort of irony. This is when the American army was coming into the concentration camps and freeing the imprisoned people there. And there is a scene saying, "The war is over. Hooray for the USA." The USA is not going to be that much liked anymore, at least in my lifetime, I think. But how would I rank these books? Both these books get a bloody hell yes. The rereading of Mouse got me thinking about this other collection that I have on my shelf that I have read before. These are the 6 woodcut wordless novels of Lynd Ward. Lynd Ward was an artist beginning in the late 20s through the early 30s, and he created 6 wordless novels by carving images onto wood and then using that wood to imprint on paper. So you get these images on paper from woodcuts. There are no words in these novels. So maybe some people will say, I didn't actually read them, I saw them, but I'm counting them as books read because these wordless novels sort of function as a silent movie on paper. They do tell distinct stories, and Lynd Ward does have a progressive sort of socialist leaning in his books. He does at one point sort of endorse communism, at least on the sly. But that was back in the age when people did not know what was going on in the Soviet Union. And Lynd Ward just wanted to sympathize with the working man. The first woodcut novel is just called God's Man, and it is essentially a Faustian deal of an artist who wants to have success and makes a deal with a sketchy character. You kind of know where that one's going on, but still one of my favorite. The second novel is Madman's Dream, and this was actually a very ambitious woodcut novel. It had too many characters. Some of these characters looked a lot alike, and it was kind of confusing. And it is probably, as I said, his most ambitious novel, but one of his weaknesses. But the last novel, he did something very interesting. This is the story of a young working man who's not making his way in the world very well. This is the height of the Depression. And so he's wandering in looking for jobs, but every now and then he gets to imagining a different world. And when he gets to imagining this different world inside of his head, you see that the color on the image becomes this off red. So you automatically know this is in a fantasy world. But when he's not in the fantasy world, it's just normal black and white. I really like these two sets. This is from the Library of America, a total of 6 novels. As I said, each individual novel could be ranked differently. As I said, Madman's Drum is probably one of the weakest novels out of these 6, but overall, I would give this collection a hell yes. I finally finished the collected fictions of Jorge Luis Borges. This is a book that I started reading in 2024. This is a collection of his short stories translated into English. This is also the kind of book that I don't think one should attempt to read front to back. This is a book to savor slowly over time, and that's how I read this. I started, as I said, in 2024 with his early short stories, and then moved into his mid-range, which I think Jorge Luis Borges was his strongest in the era when he wrote his In Garden of Forking Paths. Some of his later stories are not as strong as his earlier stories, but they're always fascinating, and you'll always come up with a gem or two. One of his last stories, Shakespeare's Memory, was utterly intriguing and fascinating. I'll just give you a brief description. A man makes a deal with someone else who says he has all of Shakespeare's memories in his head, and he can transfer those memories over to this other narrator. And he does. And all of a sudden, he remembers what Shakespeare would have remembered if he were alive. He has Shakespeare's memories. And is that a good thing? Well, he eventually gives those memories away. That's part of the deal, that you can take the memories and you can give them away. A very interesting short story. But overall, how would I rank this collection? This collection, again, gets a bloody hell yes. I finished Dr. Faustus by Thomas Mann. Thomas Mann was one of Germany's most important and influential authors after World War I and going into the World War II era. However, Thomas Mann was not a fan of the Nazis. He left Germany and went to the United States as an exile, where he wrote this novel in German. This is a fictional biography of a classical composer called Adrian Goldsworthy. Goldsworthy made a deal with the devil. In this novel, the devil is very sophisticated. He is very intellectual. He is very modern. And he gave this composer, Leverkusen, the ability to create a new form of classical music. This new form of classical music is essentially Arthur Schoenberg's 12-tone system. And I'm not going to go into an explanation of what 12-tone music is, except that it is essentially tuneless music. Let's just say it that way. A lot of people respected it in the early parts of the 20th century. Thomas Mann, not so much. He found it too modern. It did not have enough heart. It was cold. It was distant. But it was very important and popular back then. And that is sort of a story of Germany itself, because Germany itself made its deal with the devil. It sold itself out to a cold, impersonal philosophy. And in this novel, you can hear Thomas Mann behind his facade of intellectuality, this scream of what has been done to my great nation of Germany. And this is simply a fantastic book. It is incredibly dense. It is incredibly intellectual. You do have to know something a little bit about classical music to enjoy this book. At least I think so. I did some research on this book on the internet. I got some AI chatbots to give me some clues. And the AI chatbot said, well, I can tell you which passages to skip because they're too difficult. I read those difficult passages because I think they're extremely important. There is a huge chapter on Beethoven, his magnificent Opus 111, and why that piano sonata is so important to German music. And it's important because it's a counterbalance to the 12-tone system. And again, I'm not a fan of the 12-tone system either. And I had to do a little bit of research to understand exactly what the 12-tone system was trying to do. But that's a whole different video. But this book is a scream from a man's soul. Again, what has been done to my nation? And this book definitely deserves a bloody hell yes. Because Dr. Faustus was such a complicated and difficult book, I had to read something alongside it to bring my life a little bit of levity. After finishing 50 or 70 pages in a night of Dr. Faustus, I decided it's time to pick up The Far Side by Gary Larson. These are the great old cartoons from the 80s through the 90s. If you lived through that era, you know exactly what The Far Side is. There are some younger people who may not be familiar with The Far Side. The Far Side is essentially panel cartoons. He does not have reoccurring characters the way many cartoons do. And his cartoons are parodies. They're absurd. They bring the world, what is weird in this world, into light. And there's a lot of people who made comments like, what the hell was that cartoon about? And sometimes Gary Larson says, I don't know. I just drew it. Thought it was funny. And again, I'll just pick this one up at random. I don't know if that's his best. That's a cow sitting outside a house. Cow rings the doorbell. Guy comes out, and the cow is just munching grass again. Is it funny? Yeah, it's funny. It's weird. The Far Side is just an absolute joy to read. I have the complete Far Side, which comes in these 3 volumes. And it was such a treat for my mind after going through the pages of Dr. Faustus. Highly recommended. These again get a bloody hell yes. Caesar, Life of a Colossus by Adrian Goldsworthy. I actually did this in tandem with an audio book, and this is a biography of Julius Caesar. We all know a little bit of what Julius Caesar was about. You probably, maybe, have seen the play Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare. The play, not really 100% accurate. No, Goldsworthy is an historian. He went through all the modern resources to get to the end of what Caesar did. And I say did because he's an historian. He does not take a lot of risks interpreting the character of Caesar. He just wants to say, this is what we know about Caesar. And I found that very distant, very cold, kind of dry. Good history, but you really don't get to understand the man Caesar through this biography. And that a sort of a disappointment. I think historians maybe should take a little more risk and get into the character of their biographical subject, which Caesar did not. So ultimately, I'm going to say this book is a maybe. If you are interested in Roman history, it's kind of important to know what Julius Caesar did, and this book will tell you that. On my Kindle, I read Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. My friend Bad is Rad sent me a message and a picture showing this edition of Wuthering Heights that she just bought, and she was really eager to read it someday. And I replied, I've never read Wuthering Heights. Let's buddy read this. So we did. And I always thought Wuthering Heights was going to be a romance book. And I guess in a certain kind of ways, it is a romance, but it's more of a gothic romance and does not have the traditional tropes of a romance book. You do have the story of Catherine and Heathcliff, and all the characters in this book are actually a little bit dislikable. The storytelling style of Wuthering Heights is layered and a little bit convoluted. The reader has to be paying attention on who's telling the story and who is this story actually about. There are some characters who have similar names, and I got myself a little bit confused occasionally and had to go back a few pages and figure out who exactly telling the story at this time. But ultimately, I did enjoy the atmosphere of this novel, and I can see why many people love it. I think I will have to give it a reread one of these days. And how would I rank it? I would give it a hell yes. The final book that I finished in January was Breakfast of Champions by Kurt Vonnegut. This is a reread for me. This is also part of a semi-secret book group over on Voxer with Alan at Big Hard Books and Classics. We are attempting to read all of Vonnegut's novels in publication order. And this story, Breakfast of Champions, was the novel that Kurt Vonnegut published right after Slaughterhouse-Five. In this book, he says, I wrote it because I was turning 50 and wanted to reward myself with a special kind of novel. On the surface, this is the story of Dwayne Hoover, who is a businessman who's going a little bit crazy. He reads a science fiction novel by Kilgore Trout. And in this science fiction novel, it is actually written in the second person. And in the novel, Kilgore Trout is addressing the only sentient person on the planet, because all the other people on the planet are not people. They're robots. And this is actually a test of free will to see what a person will do if they have free will. Now, a robot does not have free will. And Dwayne Hoover thinks, I really am that person. So this novel will eventually bring in Kilgore Trout, the author of the science fiction novel, and it will also bring in Kurt Vonnegut, who's talking to Kilgore Trout because he says, Kilgore Trout, you are my character. You are in my book. Does that sound weird? Yes, it does sound weird. But this novel covers a lot of territory. It covers environmental concerns about global climate change. And this was done in the 70s. So back in the 70s, people were still concerned about what humans were doing to the climate. It addresses racial injustice. And it has some pictures in this book I'm not going to show you all the pictures because some of the pictures are a little bit naughty and we want to keep the algorithm happy. But how does this rank up with Kurt Vonnegut's other novels? Well, it's not my favorite novel, but it's a good novel. I would rank Slaughterhouse-Five, Cat's Cradle, Mother Night, definitely above Breakfast of Champions. But Breakfast of Champions can still earn a hell yes. Another reading project that I have for 2026 is to read a short story every day. My intentions are to try to read a variety of short stories, science fiction, mystery, translation, horror, and that sort of thing. And every Friday, I'm going to be focusing on a particular author of the month. So for the month of January, I focused on Ernest Hemingway. The Hemingway short stories that I read in January were A Soldier's Home, Hills Like White Elephants, A Clean, Well-Lighted Place, The Big Two-Hearted River, Parts 1 and 2, and The Snows of Kilimanjaro. If you have not read Hemingway before, I think his short stories are his finest work. He's written a few good novels, Sun Also Rises, A Farewell to Arms, maybe For Whom a Bell Tolls. Some of his other novels aren't quite up to snuff, but his short stories are really fantastic, and they highlight his writing style, which is very clean and clear and minimalistic. I like his short stories a lot. My favorite is still A Clean, Well-Lighted Place. Out of this collection, my least favorite was The Big Two-Hearted River stories because I'm really not that much into camping, but I understand, Hemingway made me understand how it is important for some men to be out in the wilderness and just be, and just do, and just fish. That was important to him. But I liked the inner depths of A Clean, Well-Lighted Place, where a man was just struggling with his mind and needed a place to be. I like that one the best. A Soldier's Home is a soldier returning from World War I and realizing he just does not fit into society anymore. And the other ones are also pretty good. I can highly recommend Ernest Hemingway's short stories. I will leave a list of every other short story that I read in the month of January, but I'm not going to talk about them all. Okay, that's my wrap up for January. How did I do? Since my last update, I read 6,380 pages. This brings my grand total up to 17,713 pages. And if my math is correct, I have completed 70.8% of my Read What You Own challenge. The end is getting near. Thank you for watching and keep on reading.